13th, 1917. The third apparition. Our Lady, with approximately 5,000 people present in the cove, confides to the children a great secret in 3 parts. The first part is a vision of hell. You have seen hell, where the souls of poor sinners go. To save them, God wills to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart. The second part is a detailed prophecy of events that will occur if the Pope and the bishops of the world do not perform the public and solemn ceremony of the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart. The third part, known as the third secret, involves the vision of a post-apocalyptic world in which a future pope is executed on a hill before a cross outside a devastated city along with priests, bishops, religious and members of the Lady.
The event itself might be called almost the birthday of the modern world, because it was on that day that the forces of good and evil seemed to reach their peak. Our modern world, with its great crises, began on the date of October 13th, 1917. We will take you quickly to 3 cities and show you what happened on that day, first in Moscow, secondly in Rome, and third in a little village in Portugal called Fatima. October 13th, 1917, Moscow. Maria Alexandrovich, a young Russian noble lady, was teaching religion to a group of 200 children in the Church of the Iberian Virgin. And suddenly there was a distraction. Horsemen entered the front door, down the middle aisle, vaulted the communion rail, destroyed the icons, the statuary of the altar, and then attacked the children, killing many of them. Maria Alexandrovich ran out of the church screaming. She knew that there was an imminent revolution by the communists, and she went to Lenin, whom she knew, and she said, "A most terrible thing has happened. I was teaching catechism to my children. Horsemen came in, charged them, and killed some of them. Lenin said, 'I know it. I sent them.'" It was one of the events that heralded the beginning of the terrible communist revolution that has since harassed the world. Rome, October 13th, 1917. The same hour, midday. Church bells are ringing all through the city. It was a joyful event. A bishop was being consecrated. His name, Eugenio Pacelli. A man who then was not very well known, would one day would come face to face with this great revolutionary force and would become the greatest spiritual force in the world against it. After his consecration on that 13th day of October 1917, he went to Munich. At that particular time, the communists were very strong. They were under the leadership in Munich of Karl Liebknecht, and then one of those curious women that communism spawned, Rosa Luxemburg. And an order went out to kill 325 so-called enemies. And one of them was this same Archbishop Eugenio Pacelli. The commander of the Southern Communist Army, whose name was Brother Seiler, and his aide-de-camp, Brongratz, brought in some soldiers with hand grenades, Siler himself was armed. They got into the house by a kind of a ruse, and they hid behind a curtain, waiting for the footfall of this man of whom we're speaking. And as he walked down the corridor, Siler was hiding behind a curtain. And he threw out his gun to shoot him, and the gun struck the pectoral cross on his breast. Fell to the floor. Archbishop Pacelli reached over and picked it up, handed it back to Siler, said, "Here's your gun. Kill him if you wish. I am only interested in the souls of my people." Siler and Brongrance went back, and they were unable to explain why they did not get their man. They could not explain why they were haunted by that lean figure. There was only one thing they did know, and that was that from that time on, that man would be afraid of absolutely nothing in all the world. And that man became Pius XII. And that pectoral cross that he was wearing that night, I am wearing now. Pius XII, he gave it to his esteemed friend, His Eminence Cardinal Spellman, who this evening kindly gave it to me when I told him I wished to speak of this incident. October 13th, 1917, there's a little village in Fatima where three little children, Maria, Jacinta, and Francis, were gathered expecting a revelation. They had said that Mary, the Mother of God, had appeared to them. It was not surprising, of course, if she had. It might very well have been. The Lord came through her. Through her, he worked his first miracle. And then from the cross, he commended us all to her with his kind words, "Behold thy mother." The children said that the lady had appeared to her before, appeared to them before on the 13th of April, and May and June, July, 19th of August, and the 13th of September. And in the course of the revelation, something very interesting was said, which goes to show there's something more important in this world than politics. It was said by the lady that this world war will end in a little over another year. Now remember the date, October 13th, 1917. We went to war that year on Good Friday, our country. The war did end in a little over another year on the 11th of November, 1918. And then the lady told the children to tell the world that there would come a great era of peace to the world if the world would only return to God. And Russia would be converted. But, she said, if the world does not return to God, at the close of the next pontificate, that is to say, in the year 1936, there will be the beginnings of a second world war in Spain. So evidently heaven regarded that civil war as the beginning of World War II. And then she said, but to prevent it, I ask that men do penance and prayer and return again to God. If they do not do penance, there will come World War II, which will be more terrible than World War I. Nations will be destroyed, cities blotted out, the good will suffer persecution, Russia will spread its errors and persecution throughout the world, and the Holy Father himself will suffer much. And then she gave a word of hope, but in the end, God will triumph. Wars are not just made by politics. Wars are crises and judgments that come upon us because of the way we live. But there had to be some sign that this revelation was true. And 70,000 people gathered at Fatima this particular day with the children. Now, what is interesting is that most of them were unbelievers. Portugal in those days was anarchistic, communistic, atheistic, anti-clerical. They came out of curiosity. Some of them doubted, most of them doubted that anything would happen, but the children said that the lady told them that there would be a great miracle, which would be a proof that she had actually appeared. And the proof was what was called the miracle of the sun. The sun, according to the testimony of these 70,000 people, and also according to the testimony of the atheistic, anarchistic newspapers, which I read and which indeed were very interesting, because they said, this actually happened, but we hope that nobody will interpret it in a divine way. And the sun seemed almost to detach itself and to become like a great silver ball, and then shooting out sparks in all directions. It almost precipitated itself, or so it seemed, precipitated itself upon the people. And they shouted to God for prayer. Prayer and supplication, and in sorrow and in contrition. Miracles took place in the sights of them all. No, it rained all the time. When this phenomenon had taken place 3 times, everyone found that their clothes were dry. From that time on, Fatima became kind of a gathering place of all of the people of the world who believed that peace was made somewhere else than at the tables of politicians. Namely, peace was made by prayer and reparation and expiation, sacrifice. On October 13th, 1951, I was at Fatima, and there were 1 million people.
The angel knelt on the ground and bowed very low. The children imitated the angel and repeated his words 3 times. My God, I believe, I adore, I hope, and I love you. And I beg pardon of those who do not believe, do not adore, do not hope, and do not love you. Then he rose and said, Pray this way. The hearts of Jesus and Mary are attentive to the voice of your supplications.
The miracle is the miracle in the sun, which took place on October 13th, 1917. Of course, the first apparition of Our Lady at Fatima was on this day in 1917. At the time of the miracle, Portugal was ruled by the Freemasons. For months, O Seculo, now this was the liberal, anti-clerical daily newspaper in Lisbon, for months they'd been regularly mocking the events in Fatima, both in cartoons and articles. Reporting on the July apparition in mocking tones, the paper reported, and I quote, the children intoned the funeral chant, made epileptic gestures, and fell into ecstasy, close quote. And according to the paper, the real reason for all the commotion up there at Fatima, where all these Catholic hillbillies were up there living, the real reason for this is the clergy were hoping to make a pile of money by discovering a new source of mineral water, just like they'd done over at Lourdes. And all this blasphemous nonsense was actually welcomed by the readership, because at that time, Lisbon had fallen on such rough times that by 1915 it had been proclaimed the atheistic capital of the world. How many witnesses were present at the miracle? The majority of historians estimate that on October 13th, there were a minimum of 70,000 witnesses in that crowd at Fatima. Why such a great number? Because for 3 months, since July 13th, 3 small children who could neither read nor write, Lucia dos Santos, who's 10 years old, and her cousins Francisco Marto, who's 9, and Jacinto Marto, who is 7, have been predicting that Our Lady would perform a great miracle on October 13th. And that's why at least 70,000 witnesses were present. Men from all social classes and cultural levels, the undecided but curious, the faithful that were confident of seeing a miracle, scientists, skeptics, unbelievers, and even fanatics. They're all gathered side by side in Fatima. And that's also why this is an unparalleled historical event. An incredible number of witnesses. We could cite testimonies for hours. For the sake of time, we'll simply glance at a few testimonies of eyewitnesses. As one historian notes, quote, "The witnesses of the event were indeed innumerable. Their testimonies agree, and we are flooded with the documents they have left us." Close quote. So we'll just cut and splice quotes throughout. Although the rain had been steadily pelting down all morning, it suddenly stopped, and just as suddenly the sky cleared. This abrupt change of weather took all the eyewitnesses by surprise. It was a day of heavy and continuous rain. But a few minutes before the miracle, it stopped raining. Suddenly, all the clouds disappeared without the slightest breeze, and the sun was shining in a clear sky. There were also changes of color in the atmosphere. I saw everything had assumed an amethyst color. Objects around me, the sky and the atmosphere, were of the same color. Soon I heard a peasant who was near me shout out in tones of amazement, "Look, that lady is all yellow." In fact, everything both near and far had changed. My own hand was the same color. Close quotes. So the miracle started with the rain suddenly stopping, the sky clearing, and then the sunlight goes to the different colors of the rainbow. For a description of what happened next, we'll turn to Alvelino de Almeida. Now, this guy cannot possibly be accused of being a favorable witness because he's the chief editor of O Seculo, the Freemasonic daily newspaper, and he's up there specifically to report on the events. This is a hostile witness. This account's taken from his newspaper article. Quote, "And then we witnessed a unique spectacle, an incredible spectacle, unbelievable if you did not witness it. From the road, where the carriages were crowded together, and where hundreds of persons had stayed for want of sufficient courage to advance across the muddy ground, we saw the huge crowd turn towards the sun, which appeared at its zenith, clear of the clouds. It resembled a disk of silver, and it was possible to stare at it without the least discomfort. It did not burn the eyes. It did not blind. We would say that it produced an eclipse. Then a tremendous cry rang out, and the crowd nearest us were heard to shout, 'Miracle, miracle, marvel, marvel.' The attitude of the people takes us back to biblical times. Dumbfounded, with heads uncovered, they contemplated the blue sky. Before their dazzled eyes, the sun trembled and made strange and abrupt movements outside of all cosmic laws, and according to the typical expression of the peasants, the sun danced." Close quote. And although he was attacked violently by his colleagues in the anti-clerical press, 15 days later, he renewed his testimony, and this time he also published a dozen photographs of the crowd, this immense crowd, and he repeats through the article this refrain, "I saw, I saw, I saw." He concludes, "Miracle, as the people shouted, natural phenomenon, as experts say, for the moment, that does not concern me. I am only affirming what I saw. The rest is a matter for science and the church." Close quote. So if you've seen pictures of the crowd looking up there, they were studying. You look at them, you'll notice almost nobody has shaded their eyes. And all these people looking up there, and you can see the sunlight fall on their face. Those pictures were taken by the Freemasonic newspaper. That's where we get the pictures. It's from the Freemasons, of all people. The most terrifying aspect of the miracle took place immediately after the dance of the sun. The sun seemed to suddenly plunge towards the earth. Quote, "Then suddenly one heard a clamor, a cry of anguish, breaking from all the people. The sun, whirling wildly, seemed all at once to loosen itself from the firmament, and blood red plunged towards the earth, threatening to crush us with its huge and fiery weight. The sensation during those moments was truly terrible. It seemed like a wheel of fire which was going to fall on the people." Close quotes. And quote, "Everyone within an area of 32 miles thought it was the end of the world." One witness, who was later a contractor in California, was about 18 kilometers away from Fatima. He was 12 years old, and he was herding sheep. He said, "I can't remember to this day what happened to the sheep. All I can remember is that this fireball came down upon earth, and I knew that I was about to be burned alive. And I ran, and I ran, and I ran. All I can remember is my fear. And I've often waked up at night running from the fire." Quote, "We thought it was the end of the world. The fire of the sun was on top of us. At the time the fire was coming on, there were shouts. Parents were throwing themselves to cover their children. People were shouting out their sins out loud, confessing and crying for mercy. They fell to their knees in the mud and the water, confessed their sins, and cried for mercy. And what happened? The fire went back into the sky." Close quotes. And all those people, who for the most part soaked to the bone, were amazed to discover they were dry, and that so was the ground. Quote, "This enormous multitude was drenched, for it had rained unceasingly since dawn. But though this may appear credible, after the great miracle, everyone felt comfortable and found his garments quite dry, a subject of general wonder. My suit dried in an instant. The moment one would least expect it, our clothes were totally dry." Close quotes. To those who might claim that the miracle was a product of mass hysteria or mass hypnosis, God himself prearranged a rebuttal. Perfectly credible witnesses who were very far from Fatima saw the miracle of the sun. For example, the whole village of Al-Buritel. Now in this village, it was 20 kilometers from Fatima, and they thought this was a bunch of nonsense, that these Catholic children over in Fatima were making this stuff up, and why would you waste your time to go over there? So there were people going on the road through there, and they were making fun of them. Why are you wasting your time to go listen to these three little kids? That's nuts. So they didn't believe in it at all. The whole village saw the miracle of the sun. Father Ignazio Lorenzo recalls, quote, "I was only 9 years old at this time, and I went to the local village school. At about midday, we were surprised by the shouts and cries of some men and women who were passing the street. The teacher, a good pious woman, was the first to run into the road, with the children after her. Outside, the people were shouting and weeping and pointing to the sun. It was the great miracle, which one could see quite distinctly from the top of the hill where my village was located. Objects around us turned all the colors of the rainbow. I feel incapable of describing what I saw and felt. I looked fixedly at the sun, which seemed pale and did not hurt the eyes. Looking like a ball of snow revolving upon itself, it suddenly seemed to come down in a zigzag, menacing the earth. Terrified, I ran and hid myself among the people who were weeping and expecting the end of the world at any moment." Close quote. At least 70,000 witnesses braving the rain and the mud. Suddenly the sky clears. The sun shoots out all the colors of the rainbow. It whirls and spins and dances. And then breaks free and hurtles towards earth. People convinced that they're about to be burnt alive, falling to their knees in the mud and the water, crying out their sins, calling for mercy. And then the sun retreats, leaving everyone in dry clothes on dry ground. At least 70,000 witnesses, many of them not believers. Remember that a miracle, like any natural event, is known either from personal observation or from the testimony of witnesses. The general rules governing the acceptance of testimony apply to miracles as to any other fact of history. The evidence for miracles, as is for historical facts in general, depends on the knowledge and veracity of the narrators. Such testimony we are not free to reject. Otherwise, we must deny all history whatsoever. If we have certain evidence for the fact, we are bound to accept it. We have no more rational warrant for rejecting miracles than for rejecting accounts of solar eclipses. So what have we seen? We've heard only a snippet of testimonies from witnesses of the miracle of the sun, some of whom were radical anti-Catholics, some of whom were believers, all of whom were there in response to an unprecedented prophecy, a prediction that a miracle would take place on that day, at that time, and in that place. The believers were there in anticipation of seeing a miracle. The atheists and the anti-clerical press were there with their smirks firmly in place, looking forward to being able to deal a crushing blow to the medieval superstitions of these people they considered the Catholic morons. Their accounts published before the miracle, mocking the predictions. Their photographs of the crowd. Their testimonies, written, taped, and filmed from massive numbers of the 70-some thousand witnesses. There are distant witnesses who could not possibly be accused of being under the influence of some sort of so-called mass hypnosis or group suggestion. The conclusion is obvious. The miracle of the sun is a historical fact, pure, plain, and simple.
tiveram em adoração com o anjo?
Brincávamos.
Pessoal, copinha lá.
A Maria vira-se para o lado.
Obrigado.
Num dia de verão, em que havíamos ido passar a sesta à casa, brincávamos em cima de um poço que tinham meus pais no quintal, a que chamávamos o Arneiro. De repente, vemos diante